Very excited to talk to you about some of our speakers tonight and to generally give you some updates on all things DCRM related, and hopefully all in all the session will be really useful to the really important work that you do as DCRMs. As well as you all being here as ordinary members of this group as DCRMs, we've got a few other people who are joining today, some of which are regional leadership magistrates, and some of those are quite new into the role. So just wanted to name check a few of them because certainly as DCRMs, you know, the RLMs are key people to be keeping in touch with. We've got Emily Aitken-Fell, who's the RLM for the North East. I can't see whether she's on the call, but if any of you are on, please just turn your camera on and wave. We've got Paul Wright, who's the RLM for the North West. And yeah, Paul's here. Hi, Paul. And Andrew Wood, the RLM for the Midlands. We've got some other RLMs on. I know Mary's joined. Mary Tuckett from the South East, and a couple of others. It's not mandatory for the RLMs to join, but it's a good way of just dipping in and out and keeping in touch with what we're doing as DCRMs. We've also extended the invite on this occasion to the Inclusion and Diversity Magistrates, the IDMs, because one of our speakers, Max, is going to talk about a subject which is quite relevant to the role and work of IDMs. So we thought we'd extend the invite. So yeah, we've got a very busy agenda. I'm not going to say much more because I'd like to get us on to the substance of the event and leave, as ever, plenty of time for questions and answers. But before we do that, I'd just like to invite Duncan to say a few words if he has anything at this stage.
Thank you, Luke. Just popping onto the agenda just to say hello to everybody. Good to see you all here, and thank you again for giving up even more of your time to come to this event this evening. I'd just like to also, because it may not be time at the end, just to acknowledge the work that Luke is doing on your behalf. These meetings are quite an ordeal to set up in terms of getting the speakers here and getting an agenda organised, and putting, you know, some thinking and effort into it. But also from the last meeting, as you can tell on the agenda, there were quite a few action points taken away, and I know that Luke, with the Judicial Office staff, have been working very hard to bring those matters to a conclusion so we can report to you today. So just a thank you to Luke for organising this event on your behalf. And just I'm sure he'll mention it at the end, but I just want to mention it at the start so you can begin to think about it. You will see, as part of the paperwork for this event, there is a feedback request. And it'd be very, very useful if you could feed back to us your views on these network events. They are important to us because it gets information out to you, but we'd also like some feedback from you about how useful and important you think that they are, and whether the frequency is right, whether the duration is right, whether the topics are right. So we're only on to our second one of these, so it's a good time to give us some feedback, please. And we'll make sure that we hit the points that you need us to hit. Okay, well, thank you again for all your work. I know that and I hope that you know, the Lord Chief Justice does really value the work that you undertake, and he always asks me to tell you that. So I'm passing on the message. Okay, I'll hand back to Luke. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Duncan. Okay, so let's move on to the first item. I'm delighted to welcome our first guest speaker, Dr. Max Lowenstein, who's here to speak to us about neurodiversity in the criminal justice system and communicating with neurodiverse audiences. So Max is a principal lecturer in law at Bournemouth University, and he's also a member of the Neurodivergence in Criminal Justice Network, which represents academics across the country who have an interest in neurodiversity within the law, and I think criminal law specifically. So all in all, Max is certainly a very well-informed speaker on this topic, and we thought that it would be an interesting topic to discuss and to learn more about as we go out and talk to groups, some of whom may be people with who are neurodiverse, but then more generally to think about how neurodiversity works in the criminal justice setting, not least in court, which I guess will help us as magistrates doing our day jobs, so to speak. So without further ado, Max, over to you. And I think you've got some slides. Are you able to share your screen?
Yes, I'm just having for that. I'm just locating them. Bear with me. Can everyone see that? Are they coming up?
Yeah, I can see that.
Yeah.
I think, Iram, if you spotlight, well, you might have already done it, spotlighted Max, then we can see it quite, yeah.
Is that working?
Yeah.
Perfect. I just put my timer on because I didn't want to go past the time that I got. So we'll talk about equality law essentially, and accessibility and inclusion for disabled courtroom users, and with a particular focus on neurodiversity in this talk. Just a bit about me. Beyond being an academic, I am a trustee and chairman for Action for Asperger's, which is a charity that helps give reduced rate counselling for autistic people who often struggle with related conditions of anxiety, often depression and other conditions, which we'll get into in the talk. Beyond that, have an extensive career, I suppose, interviewing judges as an academic. So globally, I've interviewed judges, and most of my publications are on the sentencing approach or sentencing around the world. In terms of what we'll talk today, I'll cover the communications in the courtroom and understanding courtroom users. And I'll also go into, I suppose, the communication challenges in the courtroom as well. And I just saw an article before I came on just now from Christine McGuinness, where she's talking about the 13 giveaway autism signs in adults. But as it's a hidden disability, it's quite a challenge sometimes to actually detect those conditions in people, particularly the high functioning autistic adults. So this is a picture that you may be familiar with if you've known Rainbow from years ago as a child. But in my life, because I have autism myself, I've often felt like Zippy, where I should zip up when there are things that I shouldn't say because of my bluntness that comes from my autism. But beyond this, there's a key question that a lot of autistic people and people with neurodiversity face with a hidden disability, and that is, do they disclose or don't they disclose? That is a very key question because it's increasing recognition of these conditions in the higher education sector, but there's still a stigma around actually disclosing these sorts of things. And if, of course, we don't disclose something, then how on earth can we assist somebody or include them in the courtroom? What we will cover today is the hidden neurodiversity, so awareness of what it is and the challenging of mental health stigma. And I suppose we will ask the question of how much sharing of information do we really want to give in this sphere, because there are risks to revealing your disability, and that's in the courtroom and as an employee in the workplace. Secondly, we'll look at the process of reasonable adjustments, which is the equality law aspect of it, and examples and joining the dots. So I've actually given advice to the CPS, the Crown Prosecution Service, on their mental health policy before, and actually advised them with their neurodevelopmental checklist that they were developing, actually to share this with the judiciary, because I felt it was so important what they were gathering, the information they were gathering at that stage could then be passed on to the courtroom later on. Thirdly, we'll look at communication best practices. So some of my articles have been, well, a few of them actually, have been on courtroom communications, and in particular the sentence explanation that you have a legal duty to give, how that's done. And of course, with neurodiverse disability courtroom users, that can be quite challenging. On the awareness, we start with that. You might want to consider these brief questions. So consider whether you know somebody who has a neurodiverse disability. You may not know somebody, or you may know somebody, and think about that person that you know. And secondly, what barriers might that person face, not just in the courtroom, but also in the workplace as well, because disability is it doesn't stop at the door of the court, it continues into a person's daily life. Beyond that, if you don't know somebody with a neurodiverse disability, you might want to think to yourself that maybe this is due to mental health stigma or disclosure. Some people just simply don't disclose it. But of course, the equality law only kicks in if we have a known disability, and that triggers the duty to make reasonable adjustments. So it's very crucial that we have that disclosure. Into equality itself, I thought I'd just show you just the breadth, quite frankly, of what equality is. And from the Equality Act, it covers a wide range of characteristics that are protected under the legislation. But I mean, even if we just took the disability one, which we're discussing today, beyond that, a person with a disability will then have other equality characteristics that define them, such as age or religion or race, and all of these factors will combine to represent what I suppose what the courtroom user really is. So it can be quite complicated, and these not only just take the disability one, you can have somebody with not just one neurodiverse disability, they can have several disabilities that are intermixing together, and other health conditions on top of that. How is it defined in the how is disability defined? Well, we can see that it's based on a substantial and a long-term impact on someone's ability to carry out their normal lives. And it's complex and interacting disabilities too. Substantial means it's got to be more than minor or trivial, and long-term means that it's got to be over for 12 months or more, which would certainly be neurodiverse disabilities. And as we can also say, as I said earlier, they're complex and interacting disabilities. So somebody with autism may have diabetes as well, and that may have an impact on their autism, or they may have other conditions too, such as depression, which interact and change the dynamic. Why tackle it? Well, the picture you can see on the right, hopefully, probably exemplifies really in a picture what disabilism looks like, and if we don't deal with it. And disabilism and ableism can be defined as I put on the slide there. But the words that sort of pick up for me are this inferiority, superiority, inferiority, which are very strong words. And when you're on the receiving end of this sort of behavior, which may not be intended actually, it can be very, very upsetting for the person involved, and the person who's perpetrated it may not even realize that they've actually practiced a bit of disabilism or ableism, particularly if we've got a hidden disability, as we're discussing today. So autism, which I have, is hidden, and as I say, the impact of it is actually quite commonly misunderstood, and still is commonly misunderstood. And on top of that, just on the autism spectrum, we have what's called masking behaviours, where autistic people actually are so good at hiding their condition that you would be very hard pressed to actually detect it unless they tell you. On the public sector duty for equality law, the public sector a duty extends to public authorities and public functions, and so this extends to the courtroom as well, and it means that we need to eliminate discrimination, harassment and victimisation under equality law. When it comes to actually then making reasonable adjustments for somebody, and it can be an employee or a service user, such as a courtroom user. The picture, I think, really exemplifies what it can actually feel like. It can feel like rungs taken out of a ladder for the disabled person, and that I suppose exemplifies the struggle that they have. But it's the disadvantages that these particular people have, which I have experienced firsthand, I suppose, as an autistic academic. People are surprised sometimes that I'm so open about my autism. That's my own personal approach, I suppose. But I'm also very open about the disadvantages, frankly, the struggles that I have in actually doing my job and actually communicating, usually social communication with other people, which is very subtle sometimes. So we want to climb up the ladder. If we're an employee, we want to get promoted in advance. And if we're a service user, we want to access the service and essentially understand what's going on in the courtroom. What reasonable adjustments can mean, the counter narrative from the employer or courtroom perspective, I suppose, is the effectiveness of the changes or adjustments that a person is asking for, its practicality, its cost, and the resources that are available to actually make changes. So, for example, if an autistic employee is at a disadvantage and they're asking for reasonable adjustments, they have to be justifiable, and the employer tends to be able to make the adjustments that are easier to make. And there are other adjustments, usually that relate to cultural change in a organization or in a courtroom, that are harder to actually change. So changing, giving equipment to somebody, for example, might be an easy thing to do if they got funding from Access to Work, but actually making a cultural change, how things are done and changing people's attitudes, that can take a lot longer to do and be more difficult to achieve. In terms of neurodiversity breadth and its strengths, you can see in this diagram here all of the types of conditions that neurodiversity comes under. But more importantly than that, we often hear about the disadvantages, but we also want to know about the strengths, frankly, of neurodiverse people. And in the research that I'm doing currently with autism employability, which is dire, by the way, only 2 in 10 autistic people actually work or do any form of work. What they tell me is we want to hear more about the strengths, and here they are for various conditions that you can see here that these people with conditions will have. And we've got to remember that, you know, it's not all a negative story. It's actually there's a lot of strengths that are there, and we should make sure that we're as aware of them as we can. Even though, as the article calls it, unusual times call for unusual thinking. So it's talking about the overlapping strengths there. And I put the links for you all to follow afterwards. In terms of related conditions, just specifically to autism that I have, you can see the various conditions there. And if we just start in the middle, we've got autism spectrum condition. By the name of the disorder itself, it is a spectrum condition. There is high and low functioning, although that terminology is being phased out. And if we go beyond the autism itself, what can it do? Well, it can be physical or mental, and it's lifelong, and it affects learning, language, and behaviours. So that's autism. If we go down to the bottom of the diagram here, we can see developmental coordination disorder there, or DCD, right at the bottom there of our circle. And that's a lifelong condition that makes it hard to learn motor skills and coordination. It's not a learning disorder, but it can impact learning or understandings that people might have in the courtroom. And if we go right to the top and look at ODD or ADD, so this covers learning disabilities such as ADHD, or attention deficit disorder, speech disorders and dyslexia, and oppositional defiant disorder. So these are specific learning or cognitive disabilities that can be related to autism. And then finally, we can go to the middle to bottom left, where it talks about SPD, if you can find it on the circle, and that's sensory integration disorder, and that includes things you see, hear, smell, taste, or touch, and can affect all of your senses, or just one of your senses. So all these conditions, just by going through them, we can see the complexity of how they can impact people's lives, and ergo courtroom users that you will encounter. Beyond this, we can see in the courtroom how potentially autism might raise its head, and the challenges that might be exhibited to judges in the courtroom. So we can see here, my sources is from a wonderful book by Alili down the bottom there, and it covers the misperceptions that autistic spectrum people may I suppose elicit from the judges. You notice I put jury in there as well, because of course if we're in the Crown Court, we have a jury and also lawyer misperceptions too. So all of the courtroom actors there could have these misperceptions of somebody with autism. And we can see here, for example, at the bottom, if we go to the bottom, unusual body movements, and at the top, memory impairments and difficulties in actually explaining emotions. So if they were a witness, for example, or being questioned in court, if we didn't know that they had autism, these would be some of the misperceptions that we might pick up from them. But none of this goes into the sentencing explanation. So this is just within the courtroom, but it does spill over into the duty to make a sentencing explanation afterwards. Now, what I did, and I thought this would be helpful to all of you, frankly, was to adapt a guide that, and this explains a struggle I've had. So I've always struggled to get published in my career with my autism. It affects my ability to understand and communicate. And what I did is I created a guide for a large global publication company called Sage. Some of you may have heard of them. And I did this guide for their editors of journals, because I was struggling to get adjustments in place for my publications, and I wanted to help other authors, frankly, to get published. So I produced this guide and I adapted it for disability reasonable adjustments in the courtroom. And you can see I've split it into dyslexia and the challenges, for example, of difficulty reading, speaking, spelling and grammar. And then also looked at the positives of it, the solutions that you can actually do in the courtroom. So, for example, with dyslexia, you can ensure their speaking tasks, the requirements within the courtroom are clearly and logically structured and are explained succinctly. And I go through this chart down to dyspraxia, and for example, we can see there at the first one, their trouble learning new skills, including writing, and also organisation and planning problems, and we can see that one-to-one support and giving extra time for tasks for these courtroom users will be particularly helpful. Other conditions I've focused on autism, as we can see here, which includes deficits in language comprehension and talks about clarity and plain language. We can see how this aligns to the sentencing explanation later on, and being much more sensitive to literal interpretations. And with ADHD at the bottom in red, we can see, for example, that organisation and planning problems may occur. And sorry, the meeting box is in the way of the answer there, but you can have a look at that. Beyond all these non-exhaustive list of adjustments and solutions, if you just Google reasonable adjustment example lists for various disabilities, you will see suggestions from charity best practice. And that's what I'm testing actually in my current research into autism employability and how that's working. Beyond this, in the workplace, this is something that I actually went through with an adjustments table, because I wanted to not only include courtroom users, but also the employment story. And we can see Some of the adjustments I asked for, I had to explain the reason why I was asking for an adjustment. So this is the negotiation phase of adjustments. And then you can see my comments or questions from the employer, and we can see that all of these were negotiated, but some were easier to negotiate than others. So the workplace coaching and the moving to a quiet space was the easiest. The hardest was actually changing at the bottom there, the communications, the culture in the organisation. That was my primary struggle, and it's ongoing. Into courtroom communications, then we know what the law says on it. Whatever ordinary language means, and of course to neurodiverse people, it can change as to its meanings and understandings. But the Judicial Officer's Equal Treatment Benchbook tries to offer us, or says to offer more clarity and simplicity, but can we actually reform this benchbook and make it even better is my question, I suppose. But we know that the sentencing explanations are complex, they're globally significant. There is a wider disability picture on your sentencing explanations, which actually we don't know about. It has not been investigated globally in research. And beyond that, it's just 1, 2, and 3. It's just my summary of my actual. I looked at my summary of sentencing communications, and you can see that from my research, I defined it as the legal obligations to engage, the judicial ideology, and then the negative and the positive sentiments that come out of sentencing communications and remarks that are given. And beyond that, I've just put some helpful resources in my slides. I'm just conscious of time, so I will end the show there.
Thank you, Max. Thank you very much. That was a really, really interesting presentation. I'm sure it's food for thought for everyone. We've got time for any questions. If people have any, either put them in the chat or raise your hand. George?
Yeah, a question for Max, really. Would he say that somebody with a learning disability has a neurodiverse condition?
Yes, well, we get into debates about definitions in disabilities, but I would say yes, but I'd say just also think beyond that, that if a person's having any difficulties, frankly, then as long as we can articulate what they are, we can try and find solutions, which is what the equality law is trying to do. But as I'm finding in my research with employability in the workplace, that's quite a complicated thing to actually do successfully.
Okay, thank you. Next person was Duncan, then Kat.
Hi, Max. Thank you. A fascinating presentation. Thank you. There's so much in there. I picked up that you've done some work with the Crown Prosecution Service, and just be interested just to sort of what was the scope of that, just very briefly. But going on, we are, of course, trying to increase the diversity of the magistracy, and we are already getting some candidates and people into the magistracy that have got neurodiverse conditions. And what I'm keen to pick up from you is, given the role of a magistrate in the courtroom, what do you think is probably the main challenge they're going to face that we as other colleagues, magistrate colleagues, need to be aware of, and also help them really, and what adjustments do you think you can reasonably make in a courtroom, given that if you've done this with the CPS, then there may be a similarity there as well. So a bit of a muddled question. Sorry, firstly, just about what was the sort of scope with the work with the CPS, but then secondly, how might we apply whatever you learnt with them to assist our magistrate colleagues who may be coming in with neurodiverse conditions?
Yes, so with the CPS, they have quite a complex mental health policy, which I reviewed for them and assisted them with. in part of that, they developed what's called a neurodiversity checklist, which was very, very detailed, gathering very, very detailed information from the defendants for their own use in the CPS. And what part of my review response was to say, well, this is actually, because it's a disclosure of health conditions that, you know, would be of interest, frankly, to you know, magistrates and judges. If to me, to join up the dots, I felt that they should actually take that information and make that available to the judges. I felt that it was so important what they were doing that they should do that. In terms of how to improve the situation, so I would say awareness and understanding, frankly. Awareness of conditions and understanding of them, and having conversations, and I think the key to it is the disclosure, and having frankly asking the question and seeing if we can improve the disclosure of mental health, because I'm extremely open about my neurodiverse disability, but others aren't. And in my research, I'm finding this as I'm interviewing people that, you know, many are not, or too worried to actually disclose. Beyond that, then you've got the adjustments themselves, examples of them, which I've actually tried to adapt and present to you in those coloured charts. And that's always really helpful, because once we know somebody has a disability, and the challenges they have, we want to know how to help them, frankly. And so the adjustments are there as a practical tool to know what to do to actually help somebody in the courtroom.
Thank you, Max. That's really, really helpful. Thank you.
And Kat.
Thank you, Max, for your presentation. It was really interesting and informative. And I think what you've just said about being informed and aware is what we all need as magistrates. As a chair, you have pronouncement cards, which are the most complicated wording of anything I've ever seen. I'm not a chair, I don't read them. And speaking on behalf of our courtroom, not many chairs use them, because you need the defendant to understand what you're saying to them. We've had experience of ADHD, and we had a meeting as a bench when we were going to give the sentence, is to give them the actual sentence first, and then, because that's what they want to hear, not the preamble up to it. So it's making those decisions even without a diagnosis when you see that person presenting in court, especially those that are unrepresented. If they've got a lawyer, they'll sometimes open with "my client has," and then a list of medical conditions. But just having that awareness and treating that person as the person, and as a magistrate, we need to make sure that when they leave that courtroom, they understand what's happened to them and why, and that adaptation of the language as well is really important. So I think as part of our training as wingers and as chairs, that these type of situations are discussed and people are aware of differences within the courtroom and adapt.
Yes, if you don't mind replying, I was going to add another spanner in the works. My research has looked at the adult courts, but also the youth courts as well, the magistrates' youth courts. So in the youth courts, there can be further misunderstandings, frankly, of the sentencing explanation, which I've done research on. But yes, I captured the judicial perspective. I think I was the first one to do that in many, many years.
Thank you, Max.
Thanks, Max. And just on that, that was going to be one of my observations / questions, was about how all of this applies in the youth court. As someone who sits in the youth court, you could argue the issues are tenfold in the youth court for obvious reasons. But are there any other questions before I wrap up? Now's your chance. We've got a few minutes left. Otherwise, no. Oh,
Make a statement, not a question. You just
go for it.
Yeah, because you just I agree with you in parts what you just said about the youth courts. However, we have had this diagnosis now for that we've known of for a while, and so we've got far more adults nowadays that we are aware are on the spectrum. So we have to be mindful of that, because the numbers of they're not children anymore, they're now adults on the spectrum. So just to make that point.
Yeah, very good point. Okay, I think we'll wrap up there. Thank you very much, Max. Really appreciate it. I think this is more the start of a conversation rather than the start and end, because clearly there is so much to talk about and discuss, and the judiciary has a role to play in these conversations. So I'm sure we'll be in touch in the future. We can pick up anything that comes out of this. If any of you DCRMs have any questions that you haven't thought of now but think of later, I'm sure, Max, if I share those questions with you on another occasion, you can do your best to answer them. But yes, we'll be in touch. Thank you so much, Max.
I was going to say, just as Columbo says, one more thing. I'd love to hear feedback on the coloured grids of adjustments in the courtroom. So when you have a look, when you get the slides and you look at those, let me know what you think, whether you think those adjustments are workable as examples, because I put them together, but I'd love to have feedback on it.
Yeah, and Ian's quite rightly prompted me to tell you all that the slides will be available. I'll share them after the session. George, you've cheekily put your hand up at the last minute.
Yeah, just very quickly, I'm thinking about adjustments. I'll put it in the chat. Have you ever come across stop go cards? They look like that. And basically they're an aid, a very simple aid. We use them for adults with learning disabilities. If you're trying to explain something to them and they don't understand, they can basically put the card up that says slow down or stop, or I've got a question. I've tried to introduce them in the courts without much success, to be honest, and I'm not sure people quite understand what they're about, but I didn't know if anybody else had come across them.
I was going to say, I have. It's in the NHS. I've seen them in the NHS before, because I've done some work with the NHS on a disability as well.
That's an interesting point, George. It reminds me of lots of other things that we've got on physically on the bench that don't end up getting used by most people. Again, back to one of the issues of this presentation that's been raised in this presentation, is about awareness and understanding of it in the first place, and maybe people who aren't confident enough to use it, that would be if we had a better awareness of it. So it's something we could take away and have a look at. Okay, all right. We're past 10 past, so I'm going to have to draw a line under it there. Thank you so much, Max. You're welcome to stay for the rest of this session if you want to, but equally, you're welcome to leave. Okay, thank you. Okay, right. I think Elaine's still here. So our second speaker this evening is Elaine Walton, who's the Regional Family Panel Leadership Magistrate for the North East England. Thank you so much, Elaine, for agreeing to come this evening and deliver a short presentation on the role and work of the family courts. So as has been previously mentioned at DCRM network events, we're very keen to ensure that the DCRMs promote the family courts, not just because we're recruiting a lot of family magistrates at the moment, so perfect timing to be talking to the community about this, but generally I think there has been more of a focus on the criminal court, because there's more of us sitting in criminal court than family court, and there's a sense in which we need to really further promote the family courts and raise awareness there. But it's obviously we don't all sit in the family courts, and myself included, I don't sit in family. So we thought that this sort of session would help upskill all of us, so that we're in a better position to talk about the family courts to the community. Apologies to those of you who already do sit in family courts, but we're hearing from an expert here. I'm going to call you an expert, Elaine, on family court, so no pressure.
Absolutely no pressure.
Yeah, but I'll hand it over to you, and as ever, there'll be Q&A at the end.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. So before I start, I think it'd be tell you a little bit about what the role's about, what I'm actually doing, because it's very new. I was appointed on the 1st of January as the North East Regional Family Leadership Magistrate, great big title, but I'm also chair of the North Yorkshire Family Panel. I stopped that on the 31st of March, hand over on the 1st of April, because I'll have completed my maximum of 3 years as the panel chair. And I've been a magistrate for 14 years. So my regional role involves communicating with the 7 panels that cover the northern region, and it extends from Humberside to Northumbria. So the aim is to connect, communicate, encourage cohesiveness and consistency across the panel. I just couldn't stop using words that began with C for that, so apologies if you think, oh. So as you know, nationally and regionally, we're short of family magistrates. Family magistrates can now start directly as a family magistrate. I'm sure there's quite a few over here can remember that you had to start in the adult court, and after 2 years you could join family, and you would have to cover both jurisdictions. And then I think it must be about 8 years ago now, they started with specialisation, and that's when I became a family specialist. We still encourage adult magistrates to add family into their portfolio, and some even like it so much they stop working in the adult court and become family only magistrates. But it does work the other way too. Direct entry family magistrates can also add adult to their court portfolio, so you can actually move things around as time goes on and you think you have the time to commit to both. I started in the old system, but I'm now a family only magistrate. So the direct entry route did cause concern when it first came in, because there were worries about people not having learnt the basics of court craft, but we were attracting so few adult magistrates into family that something had to be done. And from my experience, I think the figures support this, that the direct entry route has been a great success, particularly during COVID. We were so short of family magistrates, and we were hearing cases from our own home. I think the other thing, before I start going into the slides, is I also think family work attracts people that perhaps wouldn't normally consider applying to be a magistrate. And I've noticed in the family court, I don't have the data to support this, but I am working with more people who have an NHS background, a teaching background, or who have specific interest in children and their welfare than I did in the adult court. So the brief for this presentation this evening was to explain what the family court does for those of you who haven't experienced the family work. And the follow on from this is that you feel better informed when you're trying to encourage people to join the magistracy, whether it be adult or family work. So I'll start taking you through the slide of what is the family court. So we'll go to slide 1. So in the family court, we deal with all sorts of disputes. It's mainly to do with children and relationship breakdown. The magistrates do a lot of that work. And as well as the work that you might be more familiar with from reading the newspapers, where the children are at risk of being harmed or have been harmed, and these sorts of cases can be neglect, food, clothing, health. Usually they're all combined. The physical, sexual, psychological.
This artist creates impactful masterpieces.
Ooh. That's okay. I don't know what happened there, but wasn't from me. And as with the adult court, the seriousness and the complexity of the cases dictate whether it's heard by a magistrate or a judge. The way these cases come to court determines whether they come under private or public law. So I've been talking about disputes, that'll be the private law, and then the serious cases will be public law. So I'll tell you a little bit more about private law first of all, so that's the next slide. So in private law, these are generally, well, they're civil disputes. The individuals apply to the court and they pay a fee. It costs them £232. They also, prior to the court, have to attend a recognised mediation session with attempts to involve the respondent, other than when perhaps domestic abuse, well, other than when domestic abuse is alleged. They're exempt if there's domestic abuse involved in the issue. The things that we do have, the person that brings the case to court is called the applicant, and the person they're calling to court is the respondent. And the commonest issue is contact. Contact with their child has been stopped, blocked, or never started. We often see litigants in person. They present their own case as they're unable to afford the legal representation. It can be very emotionally tense for the people attending. They're very distraught about not seeing their child, or they're very angry. And so the emotions can run very high in the court at those times. So the role of the magistrate is often to sort of keep that temperature down, manage the people in the court so that some constructive headway can be made. There could be domestic abuse issues, and that always has to be something that's considered when somebody makes an allegation. We quite often have to have screens in court and separate waiting areas because people can say, I don't want them to be in the same courtroom, I don't want to see them, and so we have to manage with the screens down the middle. So CAFCAS, the Children and Family Court Advisory Support Service, they're absolutely fundamental to the work we do. They meet with the parents prior to court. They meet with them prior to the court about the hour before, but they also do a report. So they will telephone each of the party up, they will have a conversation about the issues, and they'll check police records, and they'll check if there's any crimes or incidents that any of the parties have been involved in, and they'll also check any social services involvement, and that comes to the magistrates, and it's called the safeguarding report, safeguarding letter. The thing that we also need to consider is that damage to the children is really one of the things that is such an issue for the family court, because even though it's called a private law and you think it's all just about contact, it's the acrimony of the parents that really damages the child, and we're trying very hard to mitigate this damage by providing frameworks, clear guidance, often through an order, of how they should share their parenting responsibilities and the time they spend with their children. We do make orders, and the orders are made and they have the authority of the court and can be enforced. It's very rare, though. People do frequently bring enforcement orders, but we very rarely will put something in, we could do a fine, a community order, or even imprisonment. We don't. Usually there's a reason why there's an issue, and often we're going through a lot of discussion to try and get the order varied so that actually it's more suitable, or we have those discussions and that it might be that there is an issue that's arisen, such as a domestic abuse allegation, and we have to rethink. So if we go to the next slide, please. So public law. So in public law, this is where you would, when you're reading the newspapers, it's all about social services involvement. And the social services, the local authority, bring the case to court, and the respondent is usually one of the parents, or both parents, or the guardian of the child. Now, the local authority social workers provide detailed reports and evidence of whether a child is at risk or indeed has been harmed. And the magistrates decide whether this potential for harm or real harm is sufficient for the child or the children to be removed from their parents or or guardians. The children could have an emergency order that takes them to a place of safety, such as a foster placement or another member of the family, while the issues are sorted out. Sometimes the children return. It could be there is a resolution of a drug or an alcohol problem, or they get sufficient help from the local authority with parenting support that allows, and they're making progress, and it's seen that they can move on with better parenting, and the children can return. And cases that don't get resolved, this can move on to adoption. And the The other thing is legal aid is usually provided for the parents when the children are at risk of not being returned to them. They do get legal aid, and that means that actually in a complex family public law case, you could have about 20 people in the room. They've each got a role because they're each supporting the individual parties, and the child themselves has a solicitor and a guardian. And so they're in, the social workers there, and they have a solicitor, and the parties all have their own legal representation as well. So it can be quite complex managing the court process. However, the public law is very, very structured. And funnily enough, when you are there, it's so managed and there's so many structures that you have to follow that it can actually not be as emotionally fraught as a private law case with an unrepresented party, even though the things that you're hearing can be, you know, that can be sort of make you really sort of pause and think about what's happening to the children that are put into this situation. I think if we go to the differences, which is the next slide, please. So what is it that's different between the adult and family court? So I think when you are in the adult court, you have your strong framework, you know what you're doing, and actually you could be depriving people of their liberty, fine, community order. Within the family court, we do a lot less of that. We can make non-molestation orders, and these are very similar to restraining orders. But generally, we're making orders that are around the child's welfare, and that's our main consideration, is the child's welfare. So in family, it's less formal. There's much more talking. It's still a structure, still who you're going to speak to, how you're going to speak to, get the evidence. There's all those things that very similar to the adult court, but it's much less formal, and you can make some, and also there's, because of difficulties for people understanding what's being said, you have to alter the language, give people time because they're upset in trying to share the information that needs to come across the court. So giving people time, making them feel relaxed so they can get the best out of them to give the information that we need. And in private law, there's often we're just talking it through with them, and the magistrates are trying to assist the parties to reach a workable compromise. The more we can get them to consent to the arrangements without making an order, the more likely it is to work. If we have to make an order because they cannot come together, you know, there's a great risk that they'll come back, or the resentment between the parties will just carry on, and the children will again be affected by that acrimony. So we really do like to get some consent and agreement before we get to a final contested hearing, which is where we have to make the order. The other thing that's key is CAFCAS are the key players in the family court. We absolutely rely on CAFCAS, and we cannot complete a case unless we've had a safeguarding report from CAFCAS. We could ask CAFCAS to go on and do something called a Section 7, and that's where they do an in-depth analysis of the situation, and they will give recommendations to the court, and they need about 3 months to complete that. I think I need to refer back to actually public law. In public law, we've just had we are re-establishing the public law outline, where we have to complete public law cases in 26 weeks. And going back to that, where you might deprive somebody of liberty in the adult court, we are actually considering taking the child from their home, or they're not going back to their family. So again, they are life-changing decisions that are being made. It might sound short, 26 weeks, but that's a long time in the life of the child, and the local authority won't bring it to court until they're just about certain that it needs to be heard by the court and a decision needs to be made. So it sounds short, but it's a long time for a child to have uncertainty. The other big difference is we get bundles. So what COVID did for us, which actually I'm very pleased about, is that we now get bundles electronically. So in the olden days, we used to drive to court and get a bundle and drive back again when we could live locally, or you'd have to turn up at court and have a mad scramble to read these bundles to get a quick grip of the cases, but could be quite frantic and meant you didn't do much in-depth reading. So the electronic bundles allow much better preparation, and I personally really prefer it as a chair. I really prefer getting my bundles, and I'm much more prepared for the court the next day. So you read them at home prior to attending court. The downside of it is that sometimes it can take a couple of hours to read. So I could hear 5 cases and I've got 5 bundles. And so each bundle is pretty thick because everything we do now is like a dispute. It's called a dispute resolution appointment. And it's an hour, but it's a biggish bundle. And so that can be off-putting. And we're trying to tackle that so we get the bundles a little bit sooner. So perhaps pick off a couple of bundles rather than actually one big massive read the night before, which is a bit headache inducing sometimes. Final orders. Well, when we do final orders, we have to provide written reasons. And the other thing that's different is the legal advisor is involved in that. So they have the right to listen to you through that decision process and your reasons, and they will assist you as well to provide those reasons, and they're written up and they get sent to the parties. And again, that's something that isn't really done in adult court. The decisions that we make, so we can hear findings of fact when we're trying to decide whether, what happens is somebody alleges domestic abuse and the other person denies it. If it's very serious and it'll affect the children staying with them, then it might move to something called a finding of fact, which is a bit like a mini trial. And we have to make a decision on who we believe, but the decisions are based on the balance of probability rather than beyond reasonable doubt. So that's another big difference, because we're trying to actually get to the stage of, will the children be safe? And of course, it's often he says, she says, so we have to do it on the balance of probability. And remote and hybrid hearings, we're very, very familiar with using electronic means to hear cases now. We had 2 years of doing, all of us sitting in our own homes, 3 magistrates and the legal advisor all sitting at homes. We couldn't get into the courts because the adult courts had to have the space and they were the priority. So we had 2 years of learning how to manage this. We did manage it and we're very adept at it now. And we can move on to things called hybrid hearings, which, I mean, you'll have experienced a lot of these in your adult court, but where we can have, CAFCAS can give us some information. I had somebody that suspected COVID, but she gave her information through the video link. And if we've got parties that are living a long way away, we can prevent them travelling for every single hearing. It's good to get them in for the final hearing, but generally when we're working our way through the process, we can do it through hybrid hearings. And occasionally we listen. The other week I was listening to 3 cases in Wakefield. Wakefield is far too far for me to travel. There were 5 cases that were on the books, and all 3 of us were from North Yorkshire, and we did a remote hearing because they weren't final hearings and we could progress the cases. So we heard those cases again remotely. And I think, just to go back to the point that whatever decision we make, the welfare of the child is of the utmost consideration. We call it, paramount consideration is what we actually are concerned with, because you can get very bound up in what the parents want and their distress, and you're trying to sort of think what would be best for the parents. They are part of that, because obviously if they can't actually commit to the things that we order, then it's not going to work. So they have to be part of that consideration, but will it suit the child, and will the child benefit from the decisions we make? And that's actually the key core of our work. So I think that's probably where I've come to. So any questions?
Thank you very much, Elaine. It was a very comprehensive presentation, and I'm sure we've all learned something, regardless of whether we sit in family court or not. That's been really, really useful. Thank you. Any questions from anyone? Yep, George.
Can you observe? Can you go and observe a youth?
So it's difficult, isn't it, in family court, because you. I think if you're interested in doing family, you can come and observe, and so when you're sort of thinking about becoming a family magistrate and you want to go and find out, then you can observe. So you have to get permission to come in, because there's a lot of, but if you're not a magistrate, you can't come and observe. It's different to when you join the adult court. The adult courts, you go in to the adult court and you observe, and you're not actually a magistrate. You have to be sworn in before you can actually come and observe in a family court. So it's slightly different. They are working on transparency, improving transparency in the family court, and they're allowing people in. They get written permission and they have to be in there. There's a number of rules around that, but it's only at the judges tier at the moment. It's not down at the magistrate tier.
Did you want to come back on that, George?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if so. As you say, you're quite right to say, in the adult courts you have to do so many observations. So how does that work in terms of going straight into being a family magistrate, rather than being what we used to have was, you quite likely said, you had to be an adult magistrate first, and then you'd apply to go into the youth or family courts. Now you're saying you can go straight into family court. So if observation is not allowed unless you're a magistrate, I take it that's not a requirement then? No,
it isn't a requirement. It's slightly different. It's slightly different for family, because you can't actually go in and observe. So what you do is, once you're sworn in and you're doing your training, and it's often actually the practicalities of it now, it is the way it's been happening, and I've seen it change, is that you're doing your training and then you do 2 observations. I think it was meant to be sworn in, observations and training, but now it seems to be sworn in, training, and then your observations. You have your 2 observations to make, and then you sit with your mentor, and your mentor is there with you when you do your observations. So that one of the observations has to be with the mentor. I did have a diary clash with one of my mentees, and so I passed it on to the chair that day, and she's a mentor, and she assisted me so that there was somebody there to take care of that person doing the observation. And actually, the other thing that happens, because they're sworn in, they can actually have a lot more discussion, and you can bring them into the retiring room and you can talk to them. So actually they get a lot more in depth, and they can ask questions about, why did we make that decision? How did we do that? They can't be part of the decision making, but they can be in listening to how we're preparing. They can be in post-court review, and then they can ask questions. And so it's actually quite helpful.
Thanks, Elaine. Duncan?
I can just help with that point in relation to how do people get an awareness of what an actual family court looks like. So people who are not magistrates, who are interested in applying for the direct route into the family jurisdiction, they are, as part of the application process, they are encouraged to observe 2 videos that are available on the I Want to Be a Magistrate gov.uk site. And they can, as I say, they're encouraged to watch these 2 videos. They are play acting, of course, but they give people a very good insight into the work of the family court. And even sometimes during the interview process, we can refer, or candidates actually refer to what they've seen in the videos or on the videos. So that's how we cover that part of the selection process, that is of course slightly different from the adult, because they have to go and observe at least 2 court sessions. If of course openness in the family court becomes more open, and of course there are some pilot studies going, pilot courts going on at the moment, then that might change, but that's how it's covered at the moment.
Thank you, Duncan. I did know that, but it just slipped my mind, so thank you for clarifying that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else with questions? I'm mindful of time. No other questions. Oh, Iram, have you got a question?
No, I'm just.
You've gone off mute because you're next up on the event. Brilliant. Okay, thank you so much, Elaine. I think, like with Max, we'll share your slides, assuming you're happy with us doing so.
Absolutely. And just while you're all listening, you might want to become a family magistrate if you're not already a family magistrate.
Yeah, very good, very good. You got the plug in there. Okay, thank you very much, Elaine. Thank you. Good evening.
Thank you.
Okie dokie. Right, so we're going to move on now to Iram, who's going to give an update on from the Judicial Office's Diversity and Inclusion team. Over to you, Iram.
So thank you for that, Luke, and thank you for that, Elaine. I'm not going to speak too much about the updates that Luke, you're going to be providing an update on some various things that I'm working on, namely some materials and some branding for the new Judicial Office logo. So I'm just working on some content with regards to the handbook material. Just very briefly, some staff changes on our team, the diversity and inclusion team. We now have the new head of D&I that started, who's Teresa Williams. There will be also a new member of staff starting next month, who will take over David's role and who's a senior manager on our team. And her name is Sandra Ubeni. And Kelly will be leaving the team mid-month next month. She's covering some maternity leave on another team, and I think that will impact the work that we sort of do, because I know that she's the point of contact for the school visit. So until further notice, until we know how her work is going to be distributed, if you just continue to contact Kelly accordingly. And just very quickly, just echoing what Duncan said about your feedback for the event, that would be great. And just a polite reminder for the annual returns. I've received some at the moment and made interesting reading, so thank you for that. The deadline for that is the 3rd of April, and there's currently an EOI at the moment for the role of the IDM for London. The deadline is the 22nd of this month. And then lastly, just following on from the last network event where I sent the diversity data forms, I've received some back, so I will be sending a polite reminder out to those who haven't completed it. And just to sort of emphasize, they will be kept confidentially and they're just for our records. And I think that's it from me, so I'll hand it over to Luke now.
Thank you, Iram. Just to underline, one of the things Iram talked about was in terms of staffing changes. It is going to mean that the Iram's team is more stretched than normal. They're as thinly spread as it is. It's not their fault, but they're going to be more stretched in the coming weeks and months. And I just wanted us all to be mindful of that when we're emailing the team. But there are contingencies in place. And I'll keep you updated as and when we get more staffing updates. I can see Teresa. I didn't realise Teresa was on the call. Who's put her hand up? Teresa, did you want to say anything? Good evening.
Hi, I just want to say hi and introduce myself. Sorry, I'm on my phone at the moment because my computer's internet seems to be down. So I'm the new head of diversity and inclusion. So as Iram's just mentioned me, I thought I'd just say hi, and I've just sort of sat in this evening just to sort of familiarise myself with the event, and I'd be really keen to meet with yourself, Luke and Duncan, at some point over the next couple of weeks, just as part of my induction. So that was all.
Great, thank you, Teresa. Thanks for putting your camera on and saying hello. Okay, brilliant. Now I'm going to go on to my updates to all of you. A lot of this is based on the individual work streams that I'd identified in my work programs, the DCRM. All of these things are supposed to make your job easier as DCRMs. Hopefully they will be doing. But yeah, I'm just going to give you an update on quite a few things. So a lot of this I have communicated via email in dribs and drabs as and when I've had updates, but I just thought it'd be useful to try and summarise now for those of you who are getting lost in and drowning in all of the emails that you're receiving from all parts of the judiciary. So the first is on PowerPoint presentations. So quite a few DCRMs gave feedback on the first batch of slides that were circulated in 2021 when the first cohort of DCRMs, myself included, were recruited. I wasn't part of the development of those slides. Other people were involved at the time. And I think I share quite a lot of this feedback, that the slides that were developed then, the content's very useful, but it's quite a heavy set of slides. And some of it wasn't particularly, some of the design of the slides weren't particularly attractive or professional. And given that the judiciary and the judicial office have just recently gone through a rebranding, thought that it would make even more sense to think about creating some more slide decks to support your work as DCRMs, and then use the new templates, the judiciary templates and branding. So we've developed a shorter slide deck that's sort of more succinct set of slides that's aimed at summarising the role of magistrates, our powers, the importance of judicial independence and the equal treatment bench book, and the magistrates recruitment process. So a lot of that content can be found in the bigger slide deck, but I thought it would be useful for us to have a shorter set of slides for sessions that you think as DCRMs would be useful. In addition to that slide deck, we've developed a set of, I think it's 5 or 6 slides that are aimed at helping people with employment, caring and other responsibilities to understand the flexibilities and support available to them if they become magistrates. Because as we know, in this recruitment drive, we're hoping to attract and recruit a more diverse group of applicants, and that will mean being able to communicate all of the flexible opportunities and options available to them and support available to them to enable them to juggle all of those responsibilities. So that's why that set of slides were developed. Now, it's important to stress that these slides do not replace the set that were developed in 2021. What I'm going to do is for that large set of slides, I'm going to put them into the new template at some point. But what I'd like us all to think of these slides of is just a selection of different groups of slides that you can mix and match depending on the audience and the purpose of the event that you're going to. See this as a flexible resource that you can pick from and mix and match, as I say. That's the purpose of it. They will be uploaded separately to the intranet and on Magistrate Matters, but I would like you to have the freedom to mix and match those slides to suit your audience. So I hope that's clear. There will be some further edits to these slides, hopefully in the next week, not least to make more mention of the family court. Obviously, we've talked about that tonight, and I think even with the new slides, there's not quite enough mention of the family court, so we'll make sure that's in there. And there'll be a couple of edits that we need to make, such as the, dare I say it, the change in sentencing powers or impending change in sentencing powers, which needs to be changed again. So that will happen pretty soon. So that's on PowerPoint presentations. I'm just going to rattle through all the others before we come to any questions. The next is physical materials. So I know that you as DCRMs have all been very keen to get hold of some physical materials. The first cohort of DCRMs were able to get some, but they weren't. It wasn't a very large range of materials and limited to sort of paper posters. So I've been working very closely with the MOJ to secure a larger suite of materials that includes things like a tablecloth, pull-up banner, stationery, all the sorts of things that can make a stall look like a professional stall and not a table with a few posters on it. And I'm very, very pleased that the MOJ has agreed to create this process. And so on, I think it was 21st of February, I emailed all of you to outline the process to request the materials. It is fair to say there have been some delays, and that's partly because of staffing changes within the MOJ team. And they have asked me to relay their apologies for that. It's also to do with, and I won't bore you with the details, but the way that they need to work with a third party or company to print all of these materials and send them out in batches. So, but I have been on the MOJ's case to make sure that they are, keeping this at the top of their priorities. And as of today, they emailed to say that they'd had 9 requests for materials, and that you should expect to receive them. The 9 that made the initial request, you should expect to receive them by this time next month. So that's what I've been told by the MOJ, and that going forward, we will try to create a sort of annual process to make that that easier, do an annual print run. And Iram will be emailing you after this session at some point this week to ask you to send your full, well, your preferred postal address, either your home address or I guess your court's address, probably your home address, to Iram, so that we can collate a full list of addresses. Because what we've found is that up until now, we've been asking DCRMs to send their addresses to all sorts of different people across the civil service, and that's not a good use of your time. So if we collate all of these addresses in one go, then we have a master list, and then as and when you request the materials, we can share the addresses with those civil servants. Of course, by sharing your details, you will be giving permission for us to share it with other civil servants, but it will be within the confines of the MOJ, HMCTS, or Judicial Office. I can see people are making comments. I can't see them just yet. I'm just going to go through my list and then I'll turn to them. Next one is business cards. Again, DCRMs had the opportunity to request business cards first in 2021. And then I arranged with HMCTS for a second batch to go out for anyone who wanted them. That was either for the new DCRMs who came in last year, or for people who've had name changes or personal detail changes. I've heard from HMCTS that there were 4 requests for business cards. So there you go. Event feedback form. So I've developed I think it's 2 sides of A4, and it's been uploaded onto the intranet and Magistrate Matters. And this is for you to use at your DCRM outreach events, because I think it's a great way of us trying to measure the impact of our events. What do people actually think of it? Has it raised their awareness of the magistracy? Has it made them more likely to consider becoming a magistrate? What did they like? What did they not like so much, to try and improve your, the qualities of the quality of the DCRM events? So that's the purpose of the event feedback form. We will develop an online equivalent, because I appreciate, this involves printing lots of feedback forms in the absence of an online equivalent, and generally people tend to prefer to fill them in online. So we'll be developing that, but you've got the PDF version on the intranet if you would like to use it for your events. Next item is diversity statistics briefing. So I said in my work programme I wanted us to develop a very easy to use and understand briefing for each DCRM that set out all of the demographic information for their area compared with the demographic information for the magistracy in their area, so that when they go to events they can talk about how representative the magistracy is in an advisory committee area or a region compared with the national population. I'm working with the National Digital Lead Magistrate on this. It's a work in progress, because it's proving quite difficult to find a way of automating the creation of these briefings from the raw data that we've got in a spreadsheet. And I'm very conscious I don't want to be sharing spreadsheets with you, which might not be the most useful way of sharing that information, when we could do it in a very easy Word document. So I'm working on it, but in the meantime, if anybody wants the data to hand, I can share the percentages with you at the drop of a hat. It's just putting it all in a nicely presentable A4 that I'm working on at the moment, so get in touch. The handbook, Iram's mentioned the handbook. We have had some conversations with other colleagues in the Judicial Office about the benefits, the merits of having a separate DCRM handbook in addition to a DCRJ handbook, because one exists for DCRJs, Diversity and Community Relations Judges, many of which you'll have met at the DCRJM conference last year. And we're still in conversation about it, because it's a very large document, and the work required to create a new one is quite a lot, and we have to go through quite a lot of governance steps to get it cleared. And I'm not sure whether that's worth us going through all of that effort if actually there's not very much that's different in terms of guidance for DCRJs as opposed to guidance for DCRMs. The difference is things like expenses, which are certainly not applying to the DCRJs, but will to the DCRMs, and the reporting lines and the reporting structures for DCRMs, which will differ to DCRJs. So we're looking at alternative ways of incorporating that in a guide that, or a couple of sides of A4 that we can share. And in the meantime, we'll look at updating the DCRJ handbook to mention DCRMs at every opportunity. So hopefully that's a pragmatic way forward. But you will have seen the DCRJ handbook. There's all sorts of information on there. It's on the internet, all sorts of guidance on there to support you in talking to various groups and managing community engagement events. That information would not be changing even if we were creating a new handbook. So my advice would be to refer to that guidebook in the meantime. So that's the handbook. Final one, expenses. So it's fair to say that there has been some confusion about the position on DCRM expenses, and I think this was always going to happen when we were creating a new process for a new group of magistrates that were taking on an additional voluntary role. And I've been working very closely with Duncan and HMCTS and the MOJ to think about how we can make this process as straightforward as possible for you, and also create a fair process that's fair across the country. So we will be issuing soon a new, clearer, in one place, probably alongside the reporting lines, putting it all in one document, an overview of what you can claim for and what you can't claim for, and what the process will look like. Because at the moment it suggests, well, this is still the case, that you will be able to claim for 4 events per year, 1 a quarter. That's travel and subsistence, travel expenses and subsistence for the 4 events. And that anything in addition, such as venue hire or additional resources, something that's above and beyond the usual, we are going to be creating a process, we'll be imminently publishing it, where you will make a bid for funding, and that bid will, there'll be a template, you know, to answer some questions. What do you want to achieve from the event? The standard questions we'd be asking anyway if you were bidding for questions, but putting all in a template, and then that will be submitted to me. I will then share it with the MOJ marketing team, and that marketing team will make a decision about whether to allocate the funding. Now, this is again a new process in itself, so I'm sure there'll be teething issues that I'll be working through. You need to give me feedback as and when you encounter issues, but the whole purpose of this is to create a fair and transparent process for bidding for additional funding. And can't really share too much more detail at this stage, other than to say that this is in an MOJ marketing budget, and therefore any bids for funding should have an element or a focus on recruiting magistrates for obvious reasons. It's coming from the MOJ marketing budget, so their objective there is about supporting the recruitment of magistrates. Where what that will mean is that if, for example, you are hoping to secure funding to deliver a talk to a school group of school-aged children, then you're not likely to get funding for that, because clearly they're not a group eligible to apply to be magistrates. So that's the position that we've reached at the moment. It should make it more straightforward. For the 4 events that you can claim for per year, you do that in the usual way of expense claims, and you would put it as OJD, other judicial duties, on the type of activity. So instead of normal sitting or whatever it's called, you put OJD, and then in the comment box, put very clearly DCRM community outreach event, and that will be the best way of submitting the claim. I know others have talked about, you know, why just 4? Why can't we claim expenses for more than 4 events per year? I totally understand that position. I think there are two issues at play here. The first is that we want to make sure that this role is as inclusive as possible for people taking it on, and we don't want to inadvertently set high expectations of DCRMs running lots of events throughout the year, you know, multiple events every month or so. That wouldn't be fair on people who can't make the commitment, and we think that 4 is fair. 1 a quarter is, as a DCRM, I think 1 a quarter is a decent frequency. And then the second, of course, is, as ever with this sort of thing, it's a balancing act, and negotiation with HMCTS and MOJ about what's the right balance to strike. But As I said from the outset, these are still evolving new processes, so there will be teething issues, and we welcome feedback as we do with all of the other points. So with that, I will stop because I'm already over time, and I think George, you've got your hand up. Feel free to ask a question if you've got one, and I'll have a quick read of the chat.
Right. Well, I put some of it in the chat already, Luke. Firstly, marketing budgets and grants. Both Richard Scotland and I attended the North East Leadership Management Committee meeting this morning, and the North East are trying to access a budget or a grant to meet the magistrate events in the North East based on expressions of interest in terms of becoming magistrates and trying to target where we actually hold these events. I'm just wondering, are we all trying to access the same budget? That's my first question. Secondly, in terms of expenses, first time I did expenses, I was told I needed to resubmit them and put my home court, my base court, as opposed to where I was attending. So, and then in other put in other duties, put in your home court or your designated court, and then put in that you're doing your DCRM work. Posters, the A3 posters, most places don't want them. They prefer a digital poster. A lot of them have digital notice boards. So could we look at, and could we put the QR code on the front of the flyers and the posters? I've given, in terms of stuff, giveaways and things like that, I've got pens, I've got tote bags and things like that. The pens have got blue ink in them. I think I've mentioned this before. And you're giving out a pen that says I can be a magistrate, and you're then having to tell people, actually, don't sign any documents with it because it's blue ink in the pen, it's not black, which seems a bit strange for us to be doing that. And I don't know if the next batch have been just a reorder or whether they've re-specified the ink there. And I'll shut up now. Oh, no, one last point. Are we getting additional DCRMs? Are we doing another recruitment? And if so, when?
Yeah, okay, I'll take those in reverse order. Please prompt me if I forget anything. So, yes, the intention is to recruit more DCRMs. Timelines are vague at this stage, but it will certainly be this year. And our intention, our priority is to recruit family-specific DCRMs for reasons we've talked about this evening. It will be the whole purpose is to get a higher number of DCRMs overall for each region. So that will be the priority. Yes, we'll be getting more DCRMs this year. And I'm aware there are some on this call who cover very unrealistically large patches of England and Wales, and you are quite rightly telling me that you need other people to support you, and I'm totally with you on that. So in parallel, we'll either be trying to fill vacancies, because there are some areas where we've had vacancies, people have resigned or they've taken leave of absence, and we'll be looking at other areas that are particularly large and sort of, quite unrealistic for one DCRM. So that addresses that point. Blue ink, I'll check with the MOJ, I'll see what they say. Digital posters, yes, the MOJ have these. I could send these tonight probably, links to them, but I will just check with the MOJ that they're the right versions. Might be able to do it tomorrow, but they have digital posters ready to share. I probably should have done that already. Submitting expenses, yes, you see, I think all of this will go into the document. As you say, put your home court and then whatever is your designated court, and then put, I think next to it there's another box, a free text box, where you can explain the exact location of where you went. You'll be aware that the expenses are not being managed by regional or local teams anymore. It's being moved to a national team. We understand that should make your life easier, because we've spoken to the national team in Manchester and they are aware of DCRMs and the important role that they do. So when they receive these expenses requests, they should know what they're about. And then I think the final one was about budgets. But this is a, and I think if I've understood the question correctly, this is a budget that is held by the MOJ, but is it's a pool of resource that is separate to, for example, advisory committees. This is something else that will be in the guidance. Is you can't bid for money for an event that an advisory committee is leading on, for example, or is organised by an advisory committee, because we're duplicating resource there. And the MOJ would already be supporting it, because advisory committees can also bid for funding from the MOJ. Does that answer the question? Probably not.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah.
No, I think no, that's good. If it's just making sure we don't duplicate that. I mean, I'm going the event that we're planning for the North East is hopefully 3 or 4, and I'll be going to one as a DCRM, but I wouldn't even think of bidding for money. I'll let it happen through the leadership group. So thank you for that. Yeah. Luke.
I think just maybe worth having a conversation with the people in the meeting to see what funding is being applied for. Yeah.
Yeah. I'll do that, and I'll come back to you on that. I tried to get on a media training course, and they're not available at the moment because I think they're re-tendering them, which seems a bit strange that we've not got continuity on them. But I just thought I'd let all DCRMs know.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks for raising that.
Course, I think it's going to be about another month before they choose a provider.
Yeah, but media training is an important one, so I can pick that up with Michael Duncan in the press office.
Thank you. I'll shut up.
Who's next? John Charles and then Amy.
Hi, 2 things. I may have missed this because my computer went dead on me. When you put in a claim, does it still have to go through the bench chair, or can we claim directly?
It'll be claiming directly. There's no longer a bench chair approval. In theory, given we've had these conversations with the Manchester team, they should accept it without any form of clearance from a bench chair.
That's fine. And the second point is I did a broadcast, an interview for a radio station in Northamptonshire, which is not my area, and it resulted in a request for me to go down to a community event. Now, I've said I need to get advice on this because it's really in Neelam's area, but it's quite a big event. It might take 2 of us. I know George and I are going to do something just over the Yorkshire, South Yorkshire, Derbyshire border. Can we both claim expenses on that outside of our area?
Yes, so long as it's within the 4 for your year, I don't see why not.
Yeah, that's okay. Good. It's good to share them, because if it's a big event, it needs 2 people there. It's an all-day event, so 2 people, more the better. Yeah. Okay, fine. Thank you.
All right, Amy.
Hi, evening everyone. Just with the 4 events, the difficulty I see is that I'm constantly getting asked to do school visits all the time, all over the place. I've done 4 this year, plus all my other stuff that I'm doing as well. And my patch, obviously, I'm covering West and North Yorkshire, but I'm doing visits in South Yorkshire as well. So obviously the travel for those is quite large for the school visits. I'm just wondering, because I'm also concerned that obviously with the magistrates in the community, we're conscious that we weren't going to be stepping on their toes and doing things that they were doing. Is there a suggestion that actually some of these visits go to magistrates in the community to do the school visits, allowing us to do more of the recruitment side of things and go into businesses and things? Because I just think we're going to be missing the school visits anyway if we're going to limit, because I'm not going to do the school visits if it's going to take me over my 4, because it's going to cost me quite additional amount of money to go do them. So I'm just thinking what everyone else's thoughts are on that, really.
Yeah, and I think the example you give of the very large patch that you cover and then going to another part of Yorkshire.
Sorry to interrupt you, Luke. Can everyone's mics, thank you, be on mute? Thank you.
I've muted them. What was I saying? Yes, your example of covering a very large patch and then being asked to go somewhere else is illustrative of the fact that we probably don't have enough DCRMs, because there should be a DCRM in South Yorkshire covering that, or that's closer than where you are. And so hopefully the overall increase in the number of DCRMs will start to help with that. And you know, don't feel pressured to take these requests. I've been clear with Kelly, and Kelly is aware that of the limitations on what we can and can't do. And I get swamped with requests for all over, not just in my patch, which tells me that there aren't enough DCRMs necessarily. So that's the first point. On the MA DCRM engagement, I know Duncan had his hand up. I didn't know if you wanted to start off on that point.
Yes, certainly. I mean, Amy, you have got a very large area, so I mean, you know, if you want to do more, then of course, you know, no one's going to probably say no. But you know, this shouldn't be at the expense of you feeling pressured to do more. We do need to recruit more DCRMs for that particular area. I think it's a sensible option that if there is a request via the Judicial Office website for somebody to go to a school and you can't do it, or it's just, you know, one visit too many, then I think if it can be covered by the magistrates in the community project, which of course very much focuses on schools, then, you know, pass the request over to them. If they say they can't do it, they're already committed, then fair enough, it'll have to be sent back to the school saying we can't do this one, but we can do the next one. So you know, please don't feel pressured. And I think in chance of you know, good relations with our colleagues in the MIC world, if they can do it, then great. The whole idea is to get somebody out there. Doesn't matter which badge they are under, quite frankly.
Exactly. The important thing is having a presence, a representative of the magistracy talking to the community. So yeah, agree with that. So that's something we can explore. And we can do that internally with the IRIMS team. I'm just going through the chat for questions that were asked there. So Kat's suggesting a Microsoft Forms for the feedback, and that's a tool used to provide an online feedback form. That's a good idea, yeah, because we use that internally as magistrates anyway. Question on how much funding can we apply for and how long will it take? Do we pay for the event first and then claim it back? The last point, no, you must bid for the funding ahead of the event. And all of this information will be included in the document, which should be with you soon. Guidance on timescales for when you should make the bid so that we're giving the officials plenty of time to consider it and make a decision. And then also how much funding you can apply for and etc. That will all be included in the guidance. It'll be coming out very soon. And then a question about whether we'll share this information with the IDMs. Yeah, I'm happy to copy in the IDMs on these emails. Did I miss anyone? Chica, you didn't get materials first time round. I'm not sure why, but I can look into that if you send me an email. But I mean, we are where we are, I guess. With that, I know you've applied for a set of materials this time round. Okay, any other questions? Conscious we're eating into everyone's evening. No other questions? Okay, well, all it leaves me to say now is thank you so much for giving up your evening. Again, really, really appreciate it. This will be recorded so you can watch it back at your leisure. And the next DCRM network event will be on Wednesday, the 14th of June, same time, 5:30 till 7. And as Duncan and Iram have said, if you have any feedback on how this session is going generally, please email me, let me know. I'm keen for us to be a bit more interactive with these sessions, so have chance for discussion rather than just us talking at you. But yeah, if you've got any feedback, just let us know. Please email me. Okay, all right. Have a good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Bye-bye.